Good morning and welcome to Dorset Council's Licensing Committee. This is an informal licensing committee meeting this morning. Do we have any apologies?
Yes, we do. We have 3 apologies from councillors David Taylor, Kathy Lugg and Paul Harrison.
Thank you. Do we have any declarations of interest? No? Okay. Do we have any public participation?
There's
no.
There's no public participation, no.
Okay, thanks Elaine. So this morning we're here to go through the draft policy for the taxi licence, and I'm going to pass this over now to John Newcombe, who's the Service Manager for Licensing and Community Safety Operations, and we also have our licensing team leader here as well, Aileen Powell. So any questions that you have, if you would like to put right to speak in the chat bar, or if you would like to do raise your hand function, that is entirely up to you. So with that, I will now pass over to John to go through the draft policy for us.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you.
Good
morning,
John.
Committee. Yes, John Newcombe, Service Manager, Licensing Community Safety. This is our first Dorset Council taxi licensing policy, so we've been working on it very hard, and a big thanks out to Aileen for all of the effort that she's put in. We've been consulting with our taxi trade, we've been consulting with focus groups, and we think we've got something that Dorset can be proud of. So, Chair, the draft policy's here for discussion today. There are some recommendations, if I can just run through those with you, Chair. The first is that we agree the draft taxi policy be published for a period of public consultation for a minimum of 12 weeks, and that's subject to any amendments that may be discussed today. The second recommendation, it's highly unlikely that this will be required because we are going to do a full and thorough consultation, so we fully expect participation and consultation submissions from the trade at least, and certainly from members of the public and other responsible authorities. However, in the very unlikely case that there are no representations, there's just a slight tweak to this recommendation, and that if there are no relevant representations, that myself, Service Manager for Licensing Community Safety, in consultation with you, Chairman, to approve adoption as opposed to recommend it for adoption. But as I say, it's highly unlikely that will happen, and so far more feasible outcome from the consultation is that there'll be a number of representations. We will need to consider each and every one of those. There may be a number of additions or omissions or amendments to the policy, and we will bring each of those back to full licensing committee for consideration prior to adoption of the full policy. It's just to note as well, Chair, that the policy will be going to overview committee for comments and for consideration by that committee, so that they'll be fed back into licensing committee as well.
Do you have the dates for that, John?
Oh,
so it's
gosh.
just going to certain committees, just for.
I have. Can I,
Sorry.
Yes. I'll run through those in a little bit, if that's okay, Chair. I'll just go and find those. So, if I can just run through what we've done. So, the taxi licensing policy, the predecessor councils, we've got 5 different policies. Dorset County Council didn't have responsibilities for taxi licensing, and so it's the 5 district and borough councils that have come together. And what we've done is we've looked at all of those policies, we've looked at the best bits, we've looked at best practice, and we've pulled together a policy which takes all of the best bits from each of those, but also updates. So it's brings in the new standards, it brings in the legislation, obviously, it brings in the safe and suitable, and it also brings in the national inspection standards. So we've brought the policy right up to date. We've tried not to do anything too contentious. We've tried to listen to the trade, listen to the general public. We've spoken to other council departments, and we've looked at best practice from other local authorities. So we've tried to pull something together which is nice and clear, easy to read, very sensible, and creates a safe environment for passengers, which is essentially the main aim of taxi licensing. So we've also had due regard to all of the other council policies which we need to take into consideration, and we've drafted up a list of consultees that we will be going and presenting the policy to. We've also spoken to our colleagues in the consultation and engagement teams. We've drafted up an online and a paper consultation document which covers all of the key aspects of the policy, which will be accessible. So if it's all right with you, Chair, shall I put the policy up onto display so that we can maybe run through that, and if there are any questions, please feel free to chip in. That's to the whole committee, and please let me know if there's any bits you'd like to have a look at.
Yeah, I think it's also just worth mentioning that obviously you have had some feedback already, haven't you, from the licensing committee and obviously from Jill as portfolio holder.
Yes, Chair. So we've had quite a lot of feedback actually. So we've had those initial focus groups where we've been talking to disability representatives and equality group. We've been talking to trade members, so representatives of trade organisations, licence holders, licensing officers, police, adults and children safeguarding, fleet, and community transport, and the school contracts team. So we've been talking to everyone that we can think of, and that's trying to get the policy into a good place, ready for a proper full public consultation. So actually, on that note, Chair, we have we've still been working on this policy. Version 7 is what was submitted to the committee for consideration today. We have made a few very minor errors to that, so we're actually up onto version 8 at the moment, and these are just grammatical, so capitalising of certain words, addition, removal of apostrophes, some formatting changes, etc. So nothing that significantly changes any of the key parts of the text. It just some updates where we've noticed a few errors. That's all. And obviously there might be some changes today as well. So the final version that will go out to consultation may look a little bit different to version 7. Let me just see if I can share my screen. Megan, can you either scroll down to the taxi policy or unshare so that I can? Is that all right? Thank you. Let me just look up those dates for you, Chair.
They have been put in the chat bar.
Oh, brilliant. Oh, lovely. Thank you. That's helpful.
For the,
yes, so it's
Place and Resource Overview Committee, 19th of October, Licensing Committee, 17th or 25th of November, and that's to be confirmed.
That's it. Yes, Chair. So, and then there's a 12-week consultation in there as well. So, can I invite any questions, any discussion for? Sorry, Chair.
No, that's absolutely fine. We have a right to speak from Councillor Fry.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Fry.
I have a few points that I wanted to raise. Can we look at page 17, please, on the policy at the moment? John, you've got there, and I'm looking at the protection of children and then the adults at risk. One thing we haven't mentioned there, and it sort of seems to fall between there, is FGM, female genital mutilation. Just picking up on that, and I don't know how you would word that or include that somewhere, but it sort of misses out there, protection of children, sexual CSE, and then adults at risk.
Thank you, Chair. I can pick that up. Yes, so we have been speaking to our colleagues over in Children's Services. What I can do, Chair, if it's all right with you, is I can go back to them as part of the consultation process and just mention what the councillor has raised, and maybe there are potential other issues that we could look at that could be included within the policy. I think it's probably a good point to say that we're introducing a number of training modules as a part of this policy for taxi drivers and operators to licence holders to undertake as a part of this policy, as part of safeguarding, and that could be one of those modules. So we could introduce that, highlight signs to look out for, issues that might cause concern, and the correct processes in order to raise those with the appropriate agency. So yeah, I'm happy to take that on board.
Thanks,
Chair.
John. That's perfect. It's just one of those. I don't know how you word it, but I think it will be useful for taxi drivers to be aware of the risk to females, particularly young people there. Page 24. Page 24, please, John. Point 2.45. DBS checks there, and you've got this mentioned in 2 or 3 other places down there through the policy, the various bits there. Should we mention there that if about the suspension of a license there at any time if that comes back?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Happy to pick that up. Yes, so that is a power that's delegated to officers, to myself and to the team leader. Should there be any issues of a safeguarding nature on a disclosure that comes in, then a licence can be suspended and also presented to committee for decision, and that happens quite regularly, as you're aware, Chair, where issues are flagged up on disclosures and the committee are asked to make a decision, and in the interim, as a precaution, officers do sometimes suspend licences. Yeah, that should be in there, but it might not be mentioned at every paragraph. I'll review that and make
John,
sure
and
it's nice and clear.
It just, I think it should be there, but you have got 2 or 3 areas where DBS and various other points are mentioned, and I wonder whether it's either repetition or whether there could be referencing the points between the points. And I read it through in quite detail, and I'm on to my next point now, but just whether we can tidy it a little bit and reduce the content of the whole policy down a bit to make it tidier.
It obviously, as reading through this and helping to pull it together with Aileen, there are a number of areas where matters are repeated, and that I think in some cases is a bit unavoidable. So
John, I absolutely get that. Sometimes you get word blindness on it. You're working so hard to create the policy that an area, so it almost needs somebody who hasn't been done, and it's a good policy, really good. So I'm not criticising it. It's constructive comments the way it's intended. Page 30 is the next point, please. .38. You've got the 48 hours, which is a time that people should report things to it. Is that practicable and reasonable? I'm just thinking of somebody who has been arrested by the police for an offence, it doesn't matter what. They're clearly traumatized, the fact that by being arrested in the police and been in those lovely police cells and spending time with bread and breakfast and porridge and all that in there. Is that a realistic timescales for people to go? Is that you see where I'm coming from on that?
It is, Chair. So we have a duty to protect the travelling public, and that is the overarching obligation under taxi licensing, under both pieces of relevant legislation. And we feel that 48 hours is ample time for them to notify us. Now that can be either by phone call or by an email. So there are a number of ways for them to get in touch with us. We wouldn't expect them to come in and see us within 48 hours, but we would expect them to notify us, because we've we have instances of quite serious matters which need to be considered, and sometimes we have to take very swift action in order to make sure that we're upholding our duty to protect the travelling public. So I'm happy that 48 hours is attainable. I'm happy to take any other comments from other members that might think any differently.
John, I don't disagree with you that actually that all of our role is to protect the travelling public. I absolutely get that, and that's fine. And for serious matters, I don't know that, but for some people, being arrested is quite a traumatic thing. So I'm happy to leave that in your very capable hands. I just wanted to raise it there. Next point is page 34, 4.17. Advertise, no real comment on that. I support the policy, what you've written there, but that's a duplication of a previous comment, and is a good example of where I was saying you've got it written twice. And there are a number of areas where it's duplicated.
Happy to look at that, and if it needs consolidating into one, then we can do that, Chair, no problem at all.
I think that's it for me for the minute. I might have some more points, I'll come back, but thank you, Chair, that's for me for the minute.
Thank you, Councillor Fry, and thank you for your comments, appreciate it. I now have Councillor Heatley.
Thank you, Chair. Just 2 points, but this is a fantastic piece of work, and the thoroughness and so on and detail I find pretty mind-boggling, to be frank. First point is about Weymouth, which is treated slightly differently because we have Hackney carriages, and there is an area defined and there's a limit on the number of Hackney carriages. I'd just like some general thoughts about that policy. Is that a policy that there has been any representations against, or is it well supported? How many actual Hackney carriages do we have in Weymouth, and how does it work?
Happy to pick that up, Chair. It's a really good comment, actually, and one which is definitely worth discussing. So it's the only part of Dorset Council area where we have a limit on the number of Hackney carriage vehicle licences that we issue. It's only Hackney carriage vehicle licences that you can place a limit on, and it is a bit of a dying practice. A lot of local authorities have moved away from limiting the numbers of licences. That being said, in certain cases, it is justifiable, shall we say. So what happens is every 3 years you commission an unmet demand survey, and basically that looks at the level of supply and demand for Hackney carriages within an area. We've only just recently commissioned one of those, and the results were that there was no significant unmet demand, i.e. you don't really need any more Hackney carriages. So the number that are operating on the streets within that Weymouth zone are sufficient to meet demand. Now that's quite expensive, that survey. I think it cost about £12,000, and as with all taxi licensing, it's done on a cost recovery basis, so those fees are passed on to the licence holders, the Hackney carriage vehicle licence holders. So we find ourselves in this situation where in an ideal world we would just want one zone for the whole of Dorset, so any taxi driver can work in any area of Dorset. However, in Weymouth, those Hackney carriage vehicle plates, they do have a value, and it's an investment for those drivers. It's a little bit of a nest egg, maybe a retirement fund, etc. And sometimes they're sold with the vehicles, not for huge amounts of money, but there's still considerable value within those. Now the proposals at this time are to create one large Dorset Council area zone, but to retain just that limit within the Weymouth area, and that's because we've only just commissioned and paid for this unmet demand survey. Now in 3 years' time, when it comes back round again for the cycle to conduct another unmet demand survey, the proposal will be that that we don't retain that limit for another 3 years. Now if the unmet demand survey comes back and it says that there is significant unmet demand, then that justifies that approach. What we did have this year when we conducted the survey, it showed that there was a bit of a gap in the amount of wheelchair accessible vehicles that were on the roads in Weymouth. So we've opened it up slightly, that we will consider applications for wheelchair accessible vehicles, and also in line with the council's climate agenda, we will also consider applications for fully electric taxis. So we haven't 100% capped that limit. They're around 80 at the moment, and so if it's wheelchair accessible and or fully electric, then we will consider those. So we've kind of taken a bit of a middle ground on it. So we're saying we're going to keep it for 3 years. We're going to conduct another survey. We are going to open it up a little bit for wheelchair and electric vehicles. So hopefully that's a sensible approach. We did speak to the trade when we were minded to put that forward as a proposal. We didn't get a massive kickback from the trade, and we think it's fairly sensible. So I'm hoping that kind of explains it a little bit. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thanks very much for that explanation. I'm personally entirely comfortable with that, but I mean, given the general pressures to let the market rip generally, it is a bit unusual, and maybe will come under some scrutiny in the consultation. I don't know, but I did find that very useful. My second point comes back to your mention about electric hackney vehicles. We do have in the draft climate change policy encouraged the use of ultra low emission public transport vehicles, brackets including cloud taxis, close brackets, particularly smaller buses. Now, one of the tools that can be used for encouraging ultra low emission vehicles, which I'll call for the purposes of this discussion electric, but I realise that it is actually a wider term. One of the ways of doing it is using licensing policy. Simple things like charging a bit less for such vehicles, giving longer licenses, in some cases setting a distant date when you will only license electric vehicles. Now, I realise that the policy that we have has got in the climate change thing says future target beyond 2023, and so maybe it's out with this consultation, but would it not be worth at least quoting that somewhere and saying, you lot have got to begin to think a bit about this, and here's 2 or 3 ideas, what do you think?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think that's a admirable proposal. If I can just explain a little bit about the process. So this is the draft taxi licensing policy, which looking at the key areas, safeguarding zones, limits, etc. You know, all of the key issues within that. Separate to this process is the setting of fees and fares. Now, what we've done to try not to overwhelm and confuse, and also to line up with the financial year, is that we're putting out the draft policy for consultation, and the aim, it's not 100% set in stone, but the aim is to have this new policy in place for 1st of January. It's at the latest 1st of February. So that's the aim for adoption of this policy, to get it into place and get it up and running. What we are also obliged to do, and we're aiming for the 1st of April for this, is to consult on a consolidated fee table. So we're looking at the costs for driver licenses, vehicle licenses, operator licenses, and we've done some calculations on how much it costs the council to run the service. We've looked at all the existing fees and charges, and as a part of that piece of work, there will be consideration of incentives for ultra low emission vehicles. There may also be consideration of some discounts or concessions for women taxi drivers in order to promote our safeguarding agenda to protect women and girls, and there's also potentially reduced licence fees for electric vehicles as well. So that is another piece of work that we're looking at. I'm quite happy to take the comment away that we should be potentially mentioning that within this policy, and I'll go away and I'll have a little read about what's in there, and then potentially update that as well before it gets sent out to consultation.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Councillor Heatley, for your questions. Appreciate them. Thank you very much. Do you have any further questions?
No, I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I now have Councillor Cocking.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, John. Thank you. A really excellent report. It's just some of it's a bit of information. Back to Councillor Fry's page 17, 2.2, where it says the authority will hold meetings with the taxi trade at least biannually. Is that standard practice across the?
So apologies if that sounds a bit confusing. So biannually for me means every 6 months, but I think you could potentially read that.
Sorry, I just froze. I don't know what. I just think I asked my question. I don't know if you answered it or not.
I'll go again just in case. So apologies if that's a bit confusing. Our aim is to meet with the trade at least every 6 months. So actually biannually might be a bit confusing. You can read that either way, can't you? That it means every 2 years. But actually no.
Yeah, that's how I read it.
We'll change that to twice a year, just so it's nice and clear. We do meet with the trade, the taxi licensing officers. Obviously, we're constantly talking to them, but I will get that updated.
And also, again on 2.2, the newsletters to the taxi trade. I don't know whether it would be useful for councillors to receive those newsletters as well, just to give us more information about, I don't know how other councillors feel about that, but it would give us more information about the trade, if there's any, what Dorset Council are thinking, what the trade are thinking, is there any changes that we need to be aware of when it comes to taxi licensing. I don't know whether that would be useful to councillors to be copied in to the newsletters. That was
that's absolutely fine. Yeah, that's a really good idea. Happy to do that. So we can send a copy to the licensing committee members. No problem at all. I think it's safe to say that when we do our licensing committee member training, that we do try to include all of the key changes, anything that's coming up in legislation. But we're actually working, Aileen and myself, looking at this at the moment. With regard to the national standards that are coming in, and we're reading a really good article from Taxi and Private Hire Monthly, which sets it out, in easy to read terms. So we're already thinking about ideas for the newsletter. More than happy to include councillors, no problem.
I think it would be better to have it drip fed to us rather than on bulk, because sometimes we have to take so much information, it's like overwhelming. Thank you, John, for that. And just one more last point. It's not a criticism, it's just you may have just changed it. It says on 2.4, all current drivers have completed some form of training, of CSE training. That sentence just sounds very woolly to me. It's not specific about what I know you said there were some new training modules and everything, but that line just sounds a bit woolly to me, as in some form of training. We don't know what training, how often, how it's monitored, and it's not very specific.
No, I agree. It's as a consequence of bringing 5 different licensing regimes together. So we had East, West, Purbeck, Weymouth and Portland, and under the Dorset Council partnership. So each area were treated, each policy was slightly different. Now we've looked at the training records and the practices within each of those areas, and we're satisfied that every driver has had some sort of training. But you're exactly right, the standards and the quality and the type and the thoroughness of that training does differ greatly, hence why we're pulling that into one system so that we can make sure that each license holder has had proper and comprehensive training in those key areas, and we're still working on that training plan. So there is work going on behind the scenes as to what those modules look like, what's going to be included, what the content will be, indeed how those will be provided, whether they'll be classroom based or online or however. So there is still work going on behind the scenes, but I do take your comment that it is a little bit woolly, and I think it is a bit woolly because we have got quite a different range.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. Can I have a think about how that's worded then? Would that be?
Sorry,
Is that okay?
I appreciate that you brought 5 councils together and everyone was very different. But I think we need to, if you're putting the policy out and someone else read that, there would be a bit, that don't sound very, especially in it's a high risk area of protection of children. It really needs to be tightened. So it's not a criticism. I understand the difficulty you have. It was just that for clarity, that we make sure that it looks really good for the members of the public as well as the other councillors. So thank you, John. And just last one, you most probably noticed it on page 47, you repeated the same paragraph 3 times about taxi signs, but that might have been on the roof. So
okay, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. I will check paragraph 47. Apologies.
That's why I'm on the Audit and Governance Committee. Sorry, no.
No, I don't.
Page 47. I think the paragraph is repeated 3 times.
Okay, that it shouldn't be. So I don't know quite what's happened there. It might be one of those Microsoft Word glitches. So I will more than happily remove two of those repetition. No problem at all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll shut up now.
No, it's all good, all good. This is what we want. Thank you for your comments. I now have Councillor Jones.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, with drivers that have been authorised or accepted under an old policy, how they migrate really to the new policy. How's that process managed in terms of any extra training they might well need to do so that they are aware they're working under the new policy? And this might sound a little bit strange, but it under 3.38, where you've got look presentable, I think there are different standards of what is looking presentable, but I actually wondered whether we could have something in there about having an acceptable standard of hygiene as well. Don't know what you think about that one. There's nothing worse than BO.
I think that is mentioned in there. It's quite hard. It's quite hard to be specific about that sort of and to go down into that sort of level. There is mention in there about acceptable levels and standards. So Aileen myself will just have another reread of that and just see if we can tweak that at all. Okay. I think just to go to your first comment. So this policy will have a commencement date. So it will come into force on a given day. That is penciled in for the 1st of January at the moment, but it may move to the 1st of February depending on how many comments we get back and how much the policy changes, and also the committee route and the process. So once this new policy comes into force, it has standing in law, and it can be relied upon, shall we say, and then it would be the duty of each licence holder to comply with the requirements within it, as it will be the duty of the licensing authority to follow the policy. Now, as with any council policy, they're not set in stone. We mustn't fetter our discretion. So obviously, if we do need to make a tweak or a decision which deviates from the policy, then we can do that if there's a good reason to do that. So, but to answer your question, it will come into force on a given day. Drivers, trade, licence holders will be given fair warning that the commencement date will be 1st of Jan, 1st of Feb, etc. But we we'll be pragmatic. So if there is a, you know, if there's a bedding in period, shall we say, we will try to assist license holders. If they don't quite get it quite right, then we will try to help. I mean, that's how we always approach licensing. We, you know, if there's a genuine mistake, a genuine misunderstanding, then we will always try to be accommodating. That being said, we will make it very clear that license holders do need to read this policy. They do need to understand that their licenses are issued subject to the text. So, and to the conditions.
Should we need them to acknowledge that they have read it and understood it? Should we ask them to acknowledge it in any way?
We do that.
You do.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. I have Councillor Weller.
Thank you, Chairman. Going back to Sue's point on the training, the suggested woolliness of that sentence, and I think that there are instances of this through the policy, and I think it's inevitable because you've been pulling all of these together. So again, these aren't criticisms, they are absolutely comments on what is a terrific piece of work, I think. But what we've got in some places is the example is drivers have completed, and we're looking at the situation now. This policy comes into place at the beginning of next year. And at the beginning of next year, we will be hoping that certainly the majority of our drivers, or a good many of them, will have completed our uniform training. So I think that we need to separate out the situation now and the situation as it will be under the new policy. So under the new policy, our aspiration is that everyone will have received the same standard of training, and it will be the same training, because we want to upgrade everyone, don't we? So do you know what I mean? So it's separating out what we have at the moment and what we intend to have from the beginning of next year in all of these things. That was all. Thank you.
Fully agree with that, Chair. It's fantastic feedback. That is the aim. The aim is to ensure that every license holder has had the same standard of training, and that will take time. So we can't place overly onerous burdens on existing license holders that have been driving, operating for years. We can't suddenly place a load of extra expense on them. So it will be a transition, and it will be over a period. As I mentioned earlier on, we are developing the training modules. We're speaking to the other partners, our colleagues in various different departments, and we're pulling together a number of different training modules. Some of them are off the shelf that already exist. Some of them we're already providing through historical frameworks, and some of them will be new. So we're giving a complete overhaul to our training program, and there will be some new modules in there. We're looking at equalities, we're looking at safeguarding, we're looking at all sorts of different areas that we can help to bring up the standards. And yes, that is the overarching aim, that each license holder will have been trained up to the same standard.
And if I can just come back on that, because I didn't see a mention of it, and it's something that I mention in all sorts of areas, and that's continuing professional development. I think if we can specifically write in there and allow for some sort of CPD that people are obliged, because we have people who've been taxi drivers for 20 years, and they will feel that they don't need any training. They know what they're doing, and they may well do, but times change, and it would be quite nice for them to have some sort of continuing professional development for that reason, and it would be good for that to be in there, that we do require our taxi drivers to do routine CPD, as most professions do.
Chair, would it be a good idea to bring Aileen in just for a second, just to talk about the training modules, because she's been working really hard on this and conducting quite a lot of consultation and research as to, you know, best practice around it and the current sort of opportunities within the marketplace. So, Aileen, are you able to jump on and just explain where we are with the training side of things?
I think it's fair to say we're in a fairly early stage of developing the training suite. What I was hoping to do initially would be to encourage the drivers to do it by the use of some accreditations and excuse me, a star rating sort of scheme like you have with other businesses, and then with a view to, once that's embedded, to maybe making some more of it compulsory when we see what the kind of take up is. It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because you're quite right. A lot of the drivers do think they don't need any more training and they don't need any more help. And it's getting that balance right. Taxi drivers are usually very competitive. So my preference would be to encourage and to award stars so that they then start sort of elbowing each other out the way to get the most stars, and then to come in with a more compulsory stance, maybe for some elements, as we develop them and as we prove them and prove their use through the system.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks, Aileen.
Thank you, Aileen. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Weller. Thank you for your comments. Do we have anybody else that would like to ask any questions, any clarification, or make any comments regarding the policy? No, silence is golden. John, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Well, I'll just run through what we're aiming to achieve and where we are, and then you can maybe make your decision about whether to proceed with the consultation. So as I said earlier on, so we've tried to make the new policy modern, easy to read, easy to understand. We're focusing very much on public safety, but we're also recognising the important part that taxis play in provision of public transport within our area. We've seized upon this as a real opportunity to improve it on equality issues. So we've been working really hard with our colleagues in the equalities group. We've identified there's an opportunity here for wheelchair accessible vehicles. Whilst working towards a single zone for the whole area, we're not quite there just yet. We've tried to envelop some sort of awareness of the climate emergency, the electric vehicles, by allowing them into Weymouth. We tried to keep the bureaucracy and the red tape to a minimum, whilst also holding standards. We obviously, as I've mentioned before, it brings in the national guidance and the standards. It sets out the lines of sharing of information between ourselves, the police, HMRC and other agencies, etc. And what we've tried to do is we've tried to take the best from each area and without disadvantaging a previous area, if you see what I mean, if that makes sense. So we tried to sort of make sensible decisions based on existing operating parameters, bearing in mind all of the new updates, guidance and standards that we need to bring in. So we've tried to do a good job. Now, I'm a realist. I know this isn't perfect. It's quite obvious to me that there are going to be some tweaks. We are going to get some feedback. There are going to be some bits that we haven't got quite right. I mean, as we've already discovered today, there's a few bits that aren't quite right. So, you know, there's a couple of paragraphs which may be duplicated, or I can't find them at the moment. So I think we may have got a rogue copy somewhere. But we will certainly be reading through this. I'm taking on board all of the comments that we've received today, making a few tweaks, and then putting that policy out for a full public consultation, and then we can have a look at what comes back in. And indeed, I'm sure that those people that take part in the consultation will be forthcoming in letting us know where they think we haven't got it quite right. So and we'll take all of those comments on board. So yes, so really, Chair, it's just if you're minded to as a committee to recommend that the policy goes out to consultation. I believe as this is an online meeting, a virtual meeting, then that decision is delegated to myself to conduct the committee's wishes. So, but I'm happy if there's any other questions, obviously, feel free.
Councillor Cocking has just put in the chat bar, she said, sorry, John, it's at the end of page 47 and the start of page 48.
Yeah, that's not in my copy, so but maybe we'll take that out offline. I think we might have a rogue version somewhere. But yeah.
Perhaps I just got the rogue version.
Because there's been quite a few versions.
Yeah, well, there have, perhaps, yeah.
Yeah, perhaps that was. I do have a right to speak from Councillor Fry.
Thanks, Chair. John, just looking at some of the points again, and I may be the one that needs advising on these. I'm looking at some of the duplications. For example, advertising is nicely covered under 2.3 to 2.34. Other way, I think. 2 points. But it's also then covered under 4.17.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to have a look at that and consolidate those into one paragraph. No problem at all.
And the same goes for DBS 2.45 and also 3.4. Now, there may be a reason for that. Because I know, having written policies in the past, I know you sometimes get word blindness when you're looking at them, and it all makes sense when you write it. But when you go back and reread it later on, it just sort of it's duplication. That's all.
We will, both of us, Aileen and myself, will have a look at that one as well. And if there isn't a good reason for it being in 2 paragraphs, then we'll consolidate that as well. No problem.
Yeah, I'm looking at the copy on ModGov, so whether there's a difference there, I don't know. As Kate's kindly put up on the thing, that's what I'm looking at on ModGov.
Okay, no problem.
Thanks, John. But other than that, it's really good and well done to those who've worked on the policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Councillor Fry. Do I have any further questions, comments that anybody would like to make? No? Okay, so if I can have the recommendations up on the screen. I would just like to say, I want to say a huge thank you to John, Aileen and the team for this policy, because it's been a big piece of work to do to bring all the authorities into one. So I can appreciate the depth that you've had to go to put all this together, and I'm really pleased with the outcome. I'm really pleased with the comments that we've had today. I also want to thank those that made the comments outside of this meeting as well. It's been really good. And I also look forward to the comments that we get back from the trade when it goes out to consultation, because they are the ones that are going to have to adhere to our policy, and it'd be interesting to see what comments that they come back with. And I'm sure we will receive quite a few comments. But I just want to say again, thanks to everybody for all their hard work. I really appreciate it. As John has already mentioned, because we are on an online meeting, obviously our decision is a minded to decision, and then the delegation to the decision to John to commence for the consultation subject to any amendments. So basically, are we minded to delegate the decision to John for this to commence for the 12-week consultation? Can I have if I don't mind if we go through a list? I don't actually have. Yes, support minded too. That's from Councillor Fry. I don't know whether you all just want to put in the chat bar that you're happy for this to go to consultation. I don't actually have a list in front of me that everybody that's on here, so I can't even do a roll call. Right, John, looking at the comments, then I believe that, yes, we are minded to delegate for you to commence to consultation.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chair. Happy to do that in full agreement. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And again, thank you for your time this morning. And again, thanks to you and Aileen and the team for this report, like this policy, because you know it's a good policy, and I'm really proud actually, because this is sort of like the third policy that we've done, and all the policies have come out absolutely brilliant. So really pleased with that. So thank you ever so much for all your hard work. Right, in that case, I don't know if I did urgent items. Did we have any urgent items? I believe we didn't, but I can't remember if I did it at the beginning of the meeting.
No, there's no urgent items.
Thank you. Okay, well, with that in mind, I will now close this meeting. Thanks everybody for your time this morning. Really appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks guys.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.